This is one of a series of Good Answers presentations, offering evidence to answer skeptical challenges to the Bible's accuracy. As we all know, the Bible presents God as creator of everything, the earth, the cosmos, and life itself. A straightforward reading of Scripture leaves little room for any evolutionary process that, over countless ages, mindlessly cobbled together the miracle that we call life. As we learn more about the nature of life, this premise of a creator becomes ever more persuasive. Since scientists learned about DNA some 60 years ago, its complexity has astounded everyone. It is, after all, the blueprint for a next generation of living things. It's commonly said, that the human brain is the most complex object in the universe. But perhaps it's not. The DNA molecule in your body contains all the information necessary for constructing a living person, including his or her brain. This lecture will explore some aspects of that incredible molecule, DNA. Let's start with something familiar to us all, word search puzzles. Many of us enjoy them. Let me suggest that there is some reason to believe that God, too, likes word search. Suppose we try one. When faced with a matrix of letters like this, we always need a strategy. Here's one that many folks like. Scan the text left to right. As soon as you locate a word, while of course ignoring what's around it, you have a start. Then go on to locate another like it, and so on. There may be several such words embedded in the matrix. But you're not through, of course. Now you need to scan the text from right to left, because there may be words in there written backward. Once you're through with this, start scanning the letters vertically, top to bottom, for more. And that's not all either, since some words may have been written bottom up. And we are still not finished, because we still have to look for words that are written on a diagonal. And finally, we can't forget ones that are diagonal in the other direction. It's easy to see why many folks like word search. All in all, it's a relaxing sort of challenge for a rainy afternoon. But have you noticed a curious detail in this? Some of the words intersect with one another, and when this happens, we see the same letters used in more than one word. Keep that fact in mind. It will give us a point of similarity when we examine DNA. Now, DNA has lots of functions, but let's look at a simple one, making a molecule of protein. We start with the building blocks for protein, amino acids. There are about 20 of them, but we'll need maybe 500 to make a protein. 8 of one kind, 12 of another, and so on. The blueprint for constructing a protein molecule, of course, is included in the DNA molecule. The necessary information is extracted when the DNA molecule unwinds, making its data accessible to a messenger molecule called RNA. That's the blue strand we see here. The messenger molecule, acting like a sort of punched computer tape, carries the information to some helper proteins called ribosomes. About 75 of them will read the tape and produce parts of the intended protein molecule. They will all work in choreographed fashion to assemble the protein we need. Now, Just how complex is that DNA blueprint? Here's an assessment from Sweden's largest medical research facility. Quote, "A new study from Karolinska Institutet shows that the grammar of the human genetic code is more complex than that of even the most intricately constructed spoken languages in the world." Wow, that's quite a claim. We'll be returning to that idea in a minute or two. In any event, we have to have that blueprint. How is the information stored in this tiny form? It uses a 4-letter alphabet, seen in this diagram attached to the steps in the spiral staircase: red, green, orange, dark blue. In effect, these letters form words for a language, and that language can express detailed information. So then, we have a language using a 4-letter alphabet. But every language has a grammar. And that's what the Swedish research professor said was so complex. And Bill Gates seemed to agree with her. Mr. Microsoft himself has said that human DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any we've ever created. He ought to know something about computer programs, I guess. So then, is DNA like computer code? Well, yes and no. Here's an example of an ultra-simple computer program with just 3 commands. First, the machine is told to write "Hello World" on the monitor screen. Then it is to pause for 5 seconds, and then it is to erase those words. That's all. Notice, though, that classic computer code is structured like this. Each line contains just 1 command. How could you get far, far more advanced than that? Maybe if 1 line did more than 1 thing? Let's take a look at some protein molecules. Here are several. Complicated little things, aren't they? There are several kinds of instructions that must be carried out to make one, including these. The specific kinds of amino acids have to be listed, and how many of each. Then they have to be assembled in just the right sequence, and the resulting protein has to be folded into a complicated shape that must be just right if the protein is to function as desired. And here's the zinger. All of these different kinds of information have to be read from that 1 string of letters in 1 portion of the DNA molecule. How does it manage that? Here's a look at the process. As we have seen, the DNA molecule partly unwinds to allow the messenger RNA to make a copy of information from it. That's the reading phase. Then, that messenger molecule, or others like it, will carry the instructions to different ribosomes to manufacture portions of the intended protein. And finally, those parts are combined and folded to form the complete protein molecule. But how is it possible to get different kinds of information or instructions from the same strand of the DNA molecule? That's where it gets interesting. As we've seen, the process involves unwinding, then reading, then transfer of information, and finally construction. Let's see how one could get different kinds of information from 1 strand of the DNA. Here's a rather crude and silly example. Can you read this line of text, all in caps and without word spacing? When a household drags the creek for some of crawdads with a sweater, silly to be sure, but intelligible. Let's say that that reading represents one of the instructions from the DNA, the proper order for assembling the amino acids for this protein. But now, let's read those letters selectively, starting and stopping at different places. Hen, house, old rags, reek of dad's sweat. That's a different meaning derived from the same stretch of text. In the DNA strand, it would be a second instruction telling how to code other RNA strands to control the process. And then, let's read it yet another way. Hold or me, raw, adds, eat. Now, this, I admit, makes no sense. It's just a string of different words. But as an example of the process, it's a third instruction. In the DNA, this one would be how to fold the protein molecule to assure that it functions correctly. My example runs out of steam at this point, but the RNA-DNA combo is still at it. There is even a fourth way to read that same strand of DNA, giving instructions on how to time and coordinate the work of those ribosomes. And remember, all of this comes from just a single strand of the DNA molecule. Do you see now why I mentioned word search? A good one of those puzzles has lots of overlapping words and dozens of letters that do multiple duty. Yep, if we were looking for a world-class champion at reading world search puzzles, we'd do no better than that little blue strand there. Since the discovery of DNA in the 1950s, we have gradually been deciphering its complex grammar. At first, we thought that one strand gave one instruction, just like a single line of computer code. Then we saw that starting and stopping in different parts of the strand yielded another meaning entirely, a separate instruction. And then someone discovered that a third reading was possible, providing even more information. And then, just as recently as 2018, the researchers learned that there is a fourth level of meaning in that one strand, giving instruction on how to fold the intended protein. Now, I confess that I found it difficult to wrap my mind around this kind of complexity. It just seemed that there were too many layers. Well, maybe another type of example would help here. Suppose you had a word search puzzle that could make sense in 4 languages. That is, several words, when read left to right, would all be Swedish. Fine. But if we were to read those same lines from right to left, they would make sense as French. But then an English speaker would interrupt. No, it should be read vertically. That's all in English. And he would be challenged by another person. Read the words diagonally. They're all Gaelic. Could you do a word search puzzle like that? I can't. But God can and did when he made DNA. So, human DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any we've ever created. Now we can see what Bill Gates meant, and what the Swedish researchers meant as well. After all that, Let's get a glimpse of what one of those proteins does once it's finished.
Membrane-bound vesicles travel to and from the plasma membrane. The directional movement of these cargo vesicles is due to a family of motor proteins linking vesicles and microtubules. Membrane-bound organelles like mitochondria are loosely trapped by the cytoskeleton.
Now, that was a motor protein, deep down inside a cell. It's essentially the UPS of the cell, locating a parcel, determining where it needs to go, towing it along one of the countless strands within the cell, and depositing it, and then going back to pick up another package. According to our standard definition of life, that little guy is not even alive. But look what he can do. Fearfully and wonderfully made is a phrase that comes to mind. But the instructions for making him came from just one strand of the DNA molecule. Now that's design. For all of you puzzle enthusiasts out there, here's a question. Who invented word search? Would it be fair to say that the best of our word search puzzles is kindergarten stuff compared to the complex grammar of DNA? And who do you suppose invented that? And you know what? Our best and brightest have been studying DNA for decades. And yet it was almost yesterday, in 2018, when they found that fourth level of meaning. Would anyone like to bet that there is not a fifth level? Or a sixth? So then, how did we ever get DNA, do you suppose? By chance? Not a chance. If you have questions about this lecture, or any of the others in the Good Answers series, you may address them to me, Dr. Jerry C. 4 at yahoo.com.